The man woke up in a void. The first thing he noticed was the silence, so quiet one could hear air molecules move around in the endless space. His fingers felt numb, as though they had just materialized from dense gas. Where am I? Where's Ellie? He mumbled instinctively. He was only met with a tug on his feet as some force pulled him downwards. Below, he could make out a single, gray platform that was dotted with specks. As he got closer, he noticed they weren't specks but heads. The man landed as though he were dust settling after an earthquake, calmly and with little force. He turned around to the nearest person. "Where are we?" he asked. The old lady on his left smiled. "You're dead." "What?" was all the man could say. "He couldn't be dead, you died. This is Purgatory Station," the woman restated, her smile unwavering. Despite her cheery expression, her eyes were elsewhere, and the man could see this too. In her eyes lay the imprints of the last thing she saw, two women crying and hugging her in some hospital. "What do you mean it's a station?" The man spun around, and as though he lifted a veil over his eyes, his brain finally poked through the mist covering the realm. Benches and shelters appeared. He could make out ticket stands, a large TV detailing train times, and even a vending machine offering skeleton chips. "Do try the Ja biscuits, they're marvelous," she mused, seeing the man's eyes settling on the machine. "This has to be a mistake that I'm not dead." The man's breath came in gasps. The old lady smiled. "I'm sorry, dear. But we are dead. I died of cancer. I fought for 4 long years, and now I am here. We're waiting for the train." Train. The man's mind raced. He remembered the car. The beer in his front seat. The thought of losing his biggest business deal. Colors began to flash. The red light he decided to ignore. The dark green of the Jeep that threw his car. How white his humerus bone was before blood began to pour. Reality settled for the man. He was dead. The Jeep Wrangler had smashed into his expensive Mercedes and wrapped his car around a pole. His wife and son were probably just finding out. "Where does the train go?" he said quietly, tears beginning to form. The lady smiled. "Heaven, of course. Heaven." The man smiled at the thought of eternal rest. "Does the station allow me to see my son? I want to see them just once." The lady smiled. "Oh yes, you get one free view every year. Use yours now if you'd like. Just wave your hand like you're opening a window." The man waved his hand, and suddenly, a blast of sky blue smashed into him as he felt the real world envelop his vision. The man's son was named Joseph. Joseph paced around the room anxiously as he waited for his father to arrive home. "He said he'd be home an hour ago. Where do you think he went?" His mom, Ellie, answered wistfully. "Must be the traffic." Joseph sat down and groaned. His father was supposed to take Joseph and his mother to dinner in celebration of closing his business deal. Why would he be late? "You know what, I'm going to go check." Joseph stormed towards the front door. Ellie called after him, but her cries fell on deaf ears. Joseph's eyes narrowed at the door, and just before he could reach the knob, a firm knock emanated from the door. "Mrs. Price." Joseph swung the door open. A police officer, clutching his bulletproof vest, appeared. With suavity, he motioned towards the stairwell. "May I come in?" he asked smoothly. Joseph nodded cautiously as he stepped back, allowing the officer to survey the house. "What's going on?" his mother asked from the top of the staircase. "Ma'am, you might want to sit down for this." The officer responded, his smooth voice now taking on a grave tone. The officer climbed the staircase solemnly with a paper in hand. "We have some news about your husband." Price sat down. "Where is he?" The officer placed the paper on the desk. "He met with an accident." Instantly, needle-drop silence filled the room, as though the air had been sucked out through the window. Ellie Price's hands flew to her mouth. "What?" Joseph asked, numbness creeping up to his voice. He met with an accident on the Woodview Turnmills intersection. Pronounced dead on arrival. Ellie put her head down and wept silently. On the other hand, Joseph ignored the ringing growing in his ears and the flash of memories now flooding him. "We understand," was all he could mumble. The officer leaned in closer. "As the heir to Price Quarries, you're gonna have to meet with your lawyer." He slid Joseph a card, "Call him whenever." As the officer walked back to the door, he took his hat off and looked at Joseph. "I'm sorry for your loss." And with that, the officer left. Joseph felt a bitter feeling crawling from the pit of his stomach. The uncomfortable ache in his shoulders grew to a mighty weight as Joseph felt the massive responsibility his father held fall onto him. As tears welled in his eyes, he wondered if his father was looking down on him. "Tough on me until the end, weren't you?" he thought, and as the spirit of the man stared at him through the window, Joseph burst into tears alongside his mother. Purgatory had now begun to fill. The man snapped back to his senses with a gasp. Awaking on a bench, he looked around and found the old lady smiling at him. "How was it?" she inquired curiously. "My son, my wife," he sputtered. "They just found out." "Oh dear, Dad, how old is your son?" "He turned 17 last November." The old lady cocked her head at him. "I feel like I know you from somewhere." The man curiously looked back. "I own a fairly large business, so..." The old lady gasped. "You're that granite quarry owner?" The man laughed. "That's me." The old lady didn't laugh with him. "Your son will be next in charge. I've taught him everything I know." The old lady sat down and began to whistle. "I've heard a fair bit about your company. How successful you were. How humble your origins were." Her kind gaze narrowed. The man felt a drop of fear, a hook to his ego. He decided not to say anything and simply fixed his tie, counting the seconds until the train would take him to heaven. Right on cue, the train burst through the veil of mist. It was sleek and shiny, with a monotone gray color scheme. It was mystical in every conceivable way, even down to the way it seemingly rolled along the tracks. The trains he was used to seeing would bump along the tracks noisily and roar. This train glided across the track with no noise, and rather than short bursts of steam, the train emitted a long wisp of smoke, similar to a cup of tea cooling. Through the window he could make out the driver. He was dressed in a sharp, blue tuxedo, with 2 stars studded on his shoulder. And as the train finally rolled in, he read the words on its side, "Afterlife Express." The doors slid open, and the man was met with a conductor. His face was about as dull as the exterior of the train. He was blond, with tired circles under his brown eyes. A gray uniform completed the rest of his rather boring appearance. An odd badge was on his heart, with a marker at its gray section. Blue and red were the other colors, placed in that order to the right of the gray. "Welcome to the Afterlife Express," he began, "where we transport deceased souls to their eternity." "Name?" The man was about to speak, but the conductor's eyes met his. Instantly, he felt a piercing sensation, as though the man's eyes had stabbed into his soul and was attempting to find something. "Never mind, I know who you are." The conductor smiled. "Great man you are. Board, please." The interior of the train, like its exterior, was monochrome. The seats were comfortable, however, and the man nearly forgot where he was until the train had been loaded. An announcement blared over the loudspeaker, its piercing volume nearly causing the man to hit his head against the seat in front of him in shock. "Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please. My name is Michael, and I'm your captain for today. We are departing from Purgatory Station, and our next stop will be the Kingdom of Heaven. Before we depart, there are a few things you must know." The man listened intently, not wanting to make a mistake in the presence of such holy and ethereal powers. He fixed up his tie and brushed his hair before staring at the screen, which displayed a transcript, For your convenience and enjoyment, this train offers Reflect TV technology. If you're lucky and procured a window seat, you'll be able to stare out the window and get a mini recap of what your life was like. If not, you'll be able to see this on your screen. By now, the train had begun to glide across the tracks once more. The second convenience we offer is 2 meals, spaced 3 hours apart, all for this 8-hour journey. You may order what you want, free of charge. Please do not harass the attendants if the food is not to your satisfaction. Remember, this is the final stretch to heaven. The man leaned back in his chair as he reached for the pair of headphones located on the seat's pocket. And the final, most fragile rule of all. If a conductor stops you from leaving, for whatever reason, a deadly, silent pause filled the air of the train. Do not argue with them. The silent pause turned uncomfortable as the man shifted in his seat. He shivered at the thought of witnessing someone disrupting things during the final stretch. The man knew he had a reputation of sometimes being a hothead, so he silently reminded himself not to scream at anyone, because all are equal in the eyes of God. Well, that's all from me, folks. Once again, thank you for taking the Afterlife Express, and don't forget to leave a good review once you leave the train. It only took an hour for the man's boredom to strike. As he looked out the window, with his Reflect TV toggled off, he noticed that the realm of the dead was somewhat linear. Purgatory was a pitch-black void, he noticed, but as they began to leave Purgatory by hour 1, the black began to stretch and fade into first a light green, then a brilliant shade of teal, before finally bursting into sky blue, with clouds dotting the canvas. The colors twisting and turning captivated the man so much he stared at the window in a trance, not looking at anything or anyone. Before he felt a tap on his shoulder. It was the blonde conductor he saw earlier. He took a sharp gasp as he returned to his senses. What would you like for your lunch? The conductor asked calmly. His once dull, gray conductor's uniform had been replaced with a bright blue. In fact, his whole outfit was emanating the same energy a certain sunny day had felt to the man. Even the normally dull face of the conductor had tugged his lips into a slight smile. The man thought about the question for a bit. He wanted an expensive meal, something he'd eat on the highest floor of a building with his colleagues. Caviar. The conductor nodded. I'll be right with you. A few minutes passed by. And the conductor brought a plate filled with the exact food the man enjoyed, and in the middle of it caviar. The little round eggs of a sturgeon were something only someone of the man's stature could eat, and as he noticed people eating other delicacies such as fried chicken, fruit salad, and rice, he couldn't help but feel smug over them. The Reflect TV technology was astounding to the man. He stared out the window as he witnessed the familiar face of his mother, before it flashed to his high school years. He made out best friends and friends long gone, and soon he was graduating. He joined a quarry. He saw the business deals, the sweat, and the effort he had put in to get to his position. He saw his years as a backhoe operator in a granite quarry. And his face, emblazoned in courage, was the highlight, enjoying the view. The man jumped. It was the conductor. I have to say, I admire your grit. You really worked your way up from a backhoe operator to CEO. Why yeah. Something the matter? No, not at all, you just surprised me. The conductor smiled. We're almost at our next stop. I'll leave you now. He closed the door and left. The TV flashed with the message, listen to the captain. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask for your attention once more. We are 5 minutes away from entering the kingdom of heaven. When you depart, please follow all instructions the angels give you to a T. I will once again remind you of the final rule I previously mentioned. The man stopped paying attention. He was too giddy with excitement. Years of hard work, years of dedication, everything had led up to this. He wondered what paradise would be like, and what he could do there. His hands twitched in his seat excitedly, akin to a child who'd just been informed their parents was buying them candy. The Reflect TV had long began looping, so he watched once more the story of life before he heard the train struggle against the tracks and finally stop. A bright light was visible in the distance, and a long path was illuminated, alongside little dots of light. The kingdom of God, he thought. He stepped out of the carriage and began shuffling down to the doors. He was last in line, which annoyed him, but he still waited. The old lady he'd met in purgatory smiled. "I can't wait to see my husband," she said excitedly. The man nodded. "I can't wait to see them, why father." He quickly made up on the spot, but as he made it to the door, the excitement overwhelmed him. He giddily put his foot outside, and just as he was about to step foot into heaven, a cold hand tapped his shoulder. "You thought you could fool us? This isn't your stop, Price." The conductor had grabbed his shoulder, and his gray uniform had begun to turn a shade of red. The man's face dropped, tears welled in his eyes. And his mouth contorted with anguish. What?" he yelled. "No. You saw my life, I was good. I was always good. I deserve to be here. The doors slammed in his face as the conductor threw him onto the floor. The man sprinted to the window and banged against the glass. "No, this is a mistake. Let me out." The conductor stared at him coldly as the train began to move. "This isn't a mistake. This is judgment." "Judgment?" the man sobbed. "Take a look." The Reflect TV morphed. He saw the bribes he gave. The people he cheated. And worst of all, the people he'd gotten rid of. The people who got in his way, he swatted like flies. After all, a human can't do much against a backhoe, no. This is some mistake. The man threw his head into his hands and knelt at the feet of the conductor. "Please, let me out." The conductor's face began to morph. The skin melted off his face and dark wings sprouted from his back. His uniform turned bright red and so did his eyes. "What is your name?" "I." The man felt the train lurch. Ignore the lurching, it's a windy path to hell, Price." The man suddenly gasped. "My name is Marcus Price." He screamed for the world to hear. The conductor lifted Marcus and placed him in a chair. "Very well, Marcus Price. You know where you're going to spend eternity, right?" Marcus sobbed quietly. The conductor rubbed his hands. "From what I know, your wife and son won't end up like you. They'll go to heaven smoothly, I will make sure of that. But you?" The conductor grinned manically. And as the train dove into the mouth of hell, Marcus Price screamed for the last time.